Picture this: a merchant in ancient Samarkand, his caravan laden with bolts of shimmering silk, bundles of fragrant spices, and caskets of glittering gems. With every step his camels take across the endless dunes, he's not just carrying goods, he's transporting the very lifeblood of empires. This wasn't just trade, this was the pulse of civilization itself. For centuries, the Silk Road was the unseen thread stitching together the fate of nations, a winding path where fortunes were made, cultures collided, and power shifted hands in the whisper of a bargain. It's easy to think of ancient history as a collection of isolated kingdoms, each ruling its own corner of the world, but the truth is far more fascinating. The Silk Road didn't just connect East and West, it rewrote the rules of influence, turning remote oases into bustling metropolises and humble traders into kingmakers. What made this route so extraordinary wasn't just the luxury goods that traveled along it, though silk alone could command prices worth their weight in gold. It was the invisible currency that flowed alongside those caravans: ideas. Religions spread like wildfire along these trails, from Buddhism's journey into China to the whispers of Nestorian Christianity echoing across Central Asia. Technologies leaped continents: papermaking, gunpowder, even the humble stirrup, all riding the waves of commerce. But most importantly, the Silk Road became a chessboard for empires. Control a critical stretch of this route, and you didn't just tax goods, you held the reins of global influence. The Parthians knew it, the Tang Dynasty knew it. Even Rome, desperate for silk, found itself at the mercy of supply chains stretching thousands of miles. This is the untold story of how a single trade route didn't just serve civilizations, it sculpted them. We'll trace the footsteps of those daring merchants who braved bandits and blizzards to deliver the impossible. Explore how a handful of trading hubs grew into supercities that dwarfed modern capitals, and uncover the shocking moments when the Silk Road tipped the scales of war and peace. From the Mongol Empire's ruthless grip on these pathways to Venice's rise as Europe's gateway to the East, every twist reveals a deeper truth. In the ancient world, commerce wasn't just about wealth, it was the ultimate weapon. So join me as we unravel how a ribbon of dust and determination became the silent architect of history, reshaping the world in ways that still echo today. The journey begins now. Long before the term Silk Road was ever coined, the foundations of this legendary network were being laid by anonymous merchants and nomadic tribes. It started not with grand imperial decrees, but with the quiet determination of traders willing to risk everything for profit. In China's Han Dynasty around the 2nd century BCE, Emperor Wu's court diplomat Zhang Qian made astonishing discoveries during his missions westward. He found thriving markets where Chinese goods were already being traded far beyond their borders. This revelation sparked an era of intentional trade expansion, as Chinese silk began flowing steadily toward Central Asia in exchange for the region's famed celestial horses. But calling it a single road is misleading. Picture instead a sprawling delta of pathways branching across deserts, mountains, and steppes. Some routes skirted the deadly Taklamakan Desert's northern edges, where travelers clung to oasis towns like Dunhuang like sailors to lifeboats. Others cut through the Pamir Mountains' treacherous passes, where merchants lightened their loads by sacrificing pack animals to the thin air. What unified these diverse trails wasn't geography, but economics, the irresistible pull of goods that couldn't be found elsewhere. Mediterranean glassware traveled east while Chinese lacquerware moved west, each exchange creating new dependencies between distant civilizations. the real genius of this system lay in its relay trade. Rarely did any single merchant traverse the entire route. Instead, goods passed through countless hands: Sogdian middlemen in Samarkand, Parthian traders in Persia, Syrian merchants in Antioch, each adding value and markup along the way. By the time Chinese silk reached Rome, its price had multiplied 100-fold, creating fortunes for those who controlled key segments. Cities like Kashgar and Merv grew fat on this traffic, their bazaars humming with dozens of languages, their streets patrolled by mercenaries hired to protect precious cargoes. What began as tentative barter between neighbors became history's first global marketplace. When a Roman matron wore translucent silk that had journeyed 12,000 miles, or when a Tang Dynasty noble sipped wine from a Byzantine goblet, they were participating in an economic revolution. This wasn't just trade, it was the birth of globalization, proving that even the mightiest empires couldn't resist the allure of what lay beyond their borders. Silk wasn't just fabric, it was magic spun into threads. To the ancient world, this shimmering material seemed almost supernatural, lighter than linen yet warmer than wool, glowing with colors that shifted in the light. The Chinese called it the breath of dragons, and for good reason. Only they knew the secret of unraveling cocoons from silkworms fed exclusively on mulberry leaves, a process so closely guarded that revealing it was punishable by death. For centuries, Chinese emperors treated silk like state secrets, using it to reward loyal nobles and awe foreign ambassadors. When a Han Dynasty envoy presented rolls of silk to Central Asian rulers, it wasn't merely a gift, it was a calculated display of technological superiority, a silent announcement that China held mysteries no other civilization could replicate. The Roman obsession with silk bordered on mania. Senators scandalized conservative citizens by wearing translucent silks that clung to their bodies, while wealthy matrons paid up to 300 denarii, a soldier's entire yearly wage, for a single pound of the fabric. Pliny the Elder fumed that Rome's gold was draining eastward to pay for this decadence, estimating the empire lost 100 million sesterces annually to the silk trade. But what truly made silk priceless wasn't its beauty, it was its power as a political weapon. Byzantine Emperor Justinian once sent silken robes to Ethiopian merchants, hoping they'd bypass Persia to bring him silkworm eggs. When that failed, he dispatched Christian monks on a mission worthy of spies. They smuggled silkworm larvae hollowed out walking sticks, breaking China's monopoly and rewriting Mediterranean economics overnight. Even warfare bowed to silk's influence. Nomadic tribes like the Chang'an demanded silk as tribute from China, using it to trade for Central Asian horses that strengthened their cavalry. The Tang Dynasty later flipped this strategy, paying Turkic mercenaries in silk to guard their borders. Perhaps most astonishingly, silk became battlefield gear. Mongol warriors wore silk undershirts because the fabric's tight weave allowed arrowheads to be extracted cleanly from wounds. From the banquet halls of Constantinople to the yurts of the steppes, this single textile wove itself into the very fabric of power, proving that sometimes the softest materials could forge the hardest empires. Imagine a world where a handful of peppercorns could buy a man's freedom, where cinnamon bark was hoarded like treasure, and a single sack of cloves could ransom a king. This wasn't fantasy, it was the dizzying reality of the ancient spice trade, a market so lucrative it built palaces, funded wars, and redrawn the map of the world. To modern eyes, spices might seem like mere kitchen staples, but in antiquity, they were the ultimate status symbols, rare, mysterious, and drenched in power. The wealthy of Rome sprinkled saffron on their theater seats to perfume the air. Medieval European kings locked pepper away in vaults alongside gold and jewels. And when the Sultan of Egypt wanted to humble his rivals, he burned a mountain of cinnamon in front of their envoys, just to prove he could afford to watch an empire's ransom go up in smoke. The obsession wasn't just about flavor. In an age before refrigeration, spices like pepper and ginger preserved meat through long winters, turning them into lifelines for survival. Cloves numbed toothaches, cardamom soothed digestion, and nutmeg was believed to ward off the plague. But their true value lay in their origins, or rather, the deliberate mystique surrounding them. Arab traders spun elaborate tales to protect their profits, claiming cinnamon grew in valleys guarded by winged serpents, or that pepper was harvested by monkeys fleeing burning jungles. These myths weren't just entertainment. They were economic warfare designed to justify outrageous prices and deter competitors. Control over spice routes became the ultimate imperial prize. When the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama rounded Africa's Cape of Good Hope in 1498, his crew reportedly shouted not for gold or glory, but for Christ and spices. The Venetian Republic, once Europe's spice gateway, watched in horror as Lisbon's warehouses overflowed with pepper, collapsing prices and bankrupting Venetian merchants overnight. Centuries earlier, the Byzantines and Persians had fought brutal wars over access to the same trade winds, while the Ming dynasty's treasure fleets returned from Southeast Asia laden with more nutmeg than silver. Perhaps no story captures the spice trade's absurd power better than the tiny Banda Islands. This remote Pacific archipelago was the world's sole source of nutmeg, a fact its people paid for in blood. In 1621, the Dutch East India Company slaughtered nearly the entire population to monopolize production, then assigned nutmeg trees to colonists like medieval fiefdoms. The company's profits soared so high that when the British briefly seized the islands, they traded them back to Holland for Manhattan. From the kitchens of peasants to the courts of emperors, spices weren't just commodities. They were the original currency of empire, proving that sometimes the smallest seeds could grow the mightiest kingdoms. Some cities didn't just sit along the Silk Road, they became its beating heart. Take Samarkand, where turquoise-domed mosques towered over markets so vast, travelers claimed you could hear a dozen languages before reaching the second stall. This wasn't just a place to rest camels. It was where Persian astronomers debated Greek mathematicians over Chinese tea, where Sogdian merchants brokered deals between Tibetan wool and Byzantine gold. The secret to Samarkand's rise, geography as destiny, perched at the crossroads of routes stretching from the Mediterranean to the Yellow River. The city didn't merely facilitate trade, it consumed it, refined it, and sent it back out as something more valuable. Local rulers knew their power came not from armies but from bazaars. They built caravansarais with vaulted ceilings to house merchants, offered tax breaks to skilled artisans, and even minted coins bearing the faces of foreign kings to grease the wheels of commerce. Then there was Constantinople, the grand funnel where East met West. While Rome crumbled, this city thrived by mastering the art of controlled flow. Byzantine emperors didn't just allow trade, they weaponized it. Silk-dyed imperial purple could only be worn by those the emperor favored, turning fabric into a loyalty test. The city's legendary Golden Horn Harbor wasn't just a port, it was a stage where Venetian galleys and Arab dhows competed for docking rights, each unloading spices and silks that would later grace European cathedrals and Islamic palaces. The Byzantines played rival traders against each other like chess pieces, ensuring no single group grew powerful enough to challenge their grip. When Crusaders sacked Constantinople in 1204, they weren't just looting a city, they were plundering the world's central switchboard, sending shockwaves through trade networks from Cairo to Kashgar. But perhaps no city embodied the Silk Road's transformative power like Chang'an, the Tang dynasty's glittering capital. With over 1 million residents at its peak, a scale London wouldn't reach for another 1,000 years, Chang'an was less a city and more a living atlas. Its markets displayed rhino horn from Africa, pearls from the South Seas, and glassware so fine poets compared it to frozen moonlight. The government established a Bureau of Barbarian Affairs not to repel outsiders, but to manage the flood of Persian musicians, Korean scholars, and Nestorian priests all clamoring for influence. Here, the Silk Road stopped being a route and became an idea proof that diversity wasn't just tolerated but harnessed. When rebellion shattered the Tang's golden age in the 8th century, it wasn't just an empire that fell, but a vision of what the world could be when cities didn't just connect places but transcended them. These urban giants shared an unspoken rule. Wealth flowed to those who welcomed the strange and unfamiliar. A Samarkand Munachanga might fund a Buddhist temple one year and a Zoroastrian fire altar the next, hedging his spiritual bets. In Constantinople, a single street could house a synagogue, a mosque, and a church, each congregation eyeing the others, trading contacts as much as their souls. And in Chang'an, a visiting Arab merchant might find his daughter married to a Chinese official within a generation, her children speaking perfect Mandarin while still hungering for dates from home. This was globalization's first draft, messy, unpredictable, and endlessly inventive. The true commodity these cities traded wasn't silk or spices, but possibility itself. Caravansarais weren't just pit stops, they were the ancient world's original power grids. Picture a moonlit desert where weary travelers spot fortress-like walls rising from the dunes, their arched gateways glowing with torchlight. Inside, a microcosm of the Silk Road thrived. Persian rug merchants haggling with Tibetan yak herders, Syrian blacksmiths repairing wagon axles, and Uyghur cooks serving steaming bowls of lagman noodles to homesick travelers. These oases of commerce didn't merely offer shelter, they functioned as the internet routers of their day, nodes where information, goods, and influence pulsed across continents. The genius of caravansarais lay in their standardization. Spaced roughly 30 kilometers apart, a day's camel journey, their identical designs created a seamless experience from the Caspian Sea to the Taklamakan Desert. High walls deterred bandits, central courtyards accommodated hundreds of animals, and second-story rooms gave merchants privacy to count coins or inspect wares. But beneath this hospitality ran an iron calculus of control. When Seljuk sultans built a network of 200 caravansarais across Anatolia, they weren't being charitable. Each stop doubled as a customs office where officials extracted taxes, checked permits, and discreetly reported suspicious cargo to the crown. A merchant might pay in silver at one stop, in bolts of linen at another, or even in political favors, like agreeing to carry royal correspondence disguised as personal letters. Some caravansarais evolved into economic superweapons. Take Rabati Malik in modern Uzbekistan, its towering portals still bearing the insignia of the Karakhanid dynasty. By offering interest-free loans to stranded merchants and free lodging for scholars, the rulers didn't just earn goodwill, they attracted the brightest minds and deepest pockets to their territory. Meanwhile, the Ming dynasty's Jiaochang caravansarai near Dunhuang had a darker purpose. Its labyrinthine corridors hid interrogation rooms where officials debriefed travelers about conditions in rival Central Asian khanates. The most strategic caravansarais became cities in their own right. Istanbul's Büyük Valide Han started as a simple rest stop before morphing into a multi-level trading empire where Armenian jewelers worked above Persian tea houses, and every whispered deal could sway the price of silk in Venice. When Mongol armies destroyed a caravansarai, they weren't just burning buildings, they were severing an empire's arteries. That's why Genghis Khan, after his initial rampage, rebuilt key way stations with military precision, staffing them with his own administrators. He understood what many modern leaders forget. Sometimes the soft infrastructure of trust and convenience outlasts the hardest fortresses. What made these structures truly revolutionary was their democracy. A caravanserai's gates opened to anyone with goods to trade, whether a Sogdian prince or a humble salt peddler. In an age of rigid hierarchies, this meritocracy of commerce became a petri dish for innovation. The mathematician Al-Khwarizmi might never have developed algebra without the cross-pollination of Indian numerals and Greek geometry he encountered at these roadside hubs. Similarly, the famed physician Ibn Sina compiled his medical encyclopedia by interviewing doctors from a dozen cultures at Nishapur's caravanserai. By the 16th century, these way stations had birthed a phenomenon we'd recognize today: brand loyalty. Merchants would detour hundreds of miles to stay at caravanserais known for honest scales or secure storage, much like modern travelers choosing trusted hotel chains. The Sharaf caravanserai in Syria even offered insurance, compensating traders for goods stolen under its roof. This created something unprecedented in the ancient world, a self-regulating trade network where reputation mattered more than royal decrees. When European colonial powers later sought to dominate global trade, they made a fatal error. They focused on controlling ports and ships while ignoring the caravanserai model. It's no coincidence that the British East India Company's rigid, top-down approach sparked constant rebellions, while the Silk Road thrived for millennia on decentralized trust. The lesson written in sandstone and caravan dust remains clear. Real power isn't just about commanding armies, but about building the rest stops where the world chooses to do business. The desert winds carried more than just sand. They carried whispers of deals struck in 100 tongues, warnings of bandit ambushes, and the rhythmic cadence of camel bells announcing the arrival of another Sogdian caravan. These weren't aimless wanderers drifting across the steppe. They were the original logistics experts, the ones who turned the Silk Road from a collection of trails into a precision machine. While emperors took credit for the trade networks, it was the nomads who kept the gears turning, their lives a masterclass in adaptation. Take the Sogdians, merchants from the valleys of modern Uzbekistan, who didn't just traverse the route, they rewrote its rulebook. Their secret, a network of diaspora communities stretching from China to the Black Sea, each outpost a node in an intelligence web that relayed market prices, political upheavals, and even weather patterns faster than any imperial courier could dream. Mobility was their superpower. A Sogdian trader could dismantle his felt-walled yurt in minutes, load it onto Bactrian camels bred for 40-day waterless marches, and reroute his entire caravan based on a whispered tip about a mountain pass snowed shut. Their lightweight silver bowls and glassware custom-made to survive rough journeys became the ancient equivalent of crash-tested cargo, but their real genius lay in diplomacy. When a Tang Dynasty emperor needed to negotiate with Turkic Khans, he sent Sogdians as interpreters. When Persian and Byzantine rulers teetered on the brink of war over trade disputes, it was Sogdian intermediaries who brokered ceasefires for a percentage of the saved profits, of course. Then came the Mongols, who didn't just participate in the Silk Road, they weaponized it. Under Genghis Khan's ruthless pragmatism, the world's most feared conquerors became its most unlikely trade facilitators. The Pax Mongolica wasn't just peace, it was a corporate merger of continents. Mongol patrols exterminated bandits along the entire route, while their famed Yam postal system, with relay stations every 40 kilometers, let a merchant send a message from Beijing to Budapest in weeks instead of years. They standardized weights, introduced paper currency backed by silk reserves, and even enforced quality control, executing traders caught selling fraudulent gems. But the nomads' greatest leverage was their ability to play empires against each other. When the Uyghurs controlled the Tarim Basin's jade trade, they deliberately slow shipments to China until the Tang court raised prices. The Kyrgyz nomads perfected a form of economic blackmail, threatening to divert caravans away from vulnerable cities unless rulers paid protection fees in silver. And when the Khazars converted to Judaism in the 8th century, it wasn't just spiritual, it made them neutral brokers between Christian Byzantium and the Muslim Caliphate, skimming profits from both. What these cultures understood was simple. In a world where cities rose and fell, nomadism was the ultimate failsafe. A drought might destroy an agricultural empire, but herders could move their flocks. Plagues that devastated crowded trading posts barely touched dispersed clans. When the Black Death ravaged Eurasia in the 14th century, it was the nomads, with their decentralized lifestyles and immunity, building exposure to diverse pathogens, who kept the Silk Road's remnants alive. Their legacy isn't just in the goods they moved, but in the enduring lesson they taught. Sometimes the most powerful people aren't those who build walls, but those who know how to slip between them. A Chinese emperor's most valuable export wasn't silk, it was his silence. When Tang Dynasty ruler Taizong received envoys from Persia in 638, he didn't just exchange gifts, he staged an elaborate performance of withheld knowledge. His astronomers demonstrated celestial predictions accurate to the minute. His physicians diagnosed illnesses with a glance, and his engineers showcased water clocks more precise than anything in the West. But when the Persians begged for these technologies, the emperor merely smiled and redirected the conversation to silk prices. This wasn't rudeness, it was high-stakes diplomacy, using trade as a chessboard where knowledge itself became the ultimate bargaining chip. The Silk Road's caravan tracks doubled as channels for statecraft so subtle, modern diplomats would envy its finesse. Consider the Byzantine Empire's masterstroke in 568, when Emperor Justin Roman II sent Sogdian merchants, not soldiers, to break Persia's stranglehold on silk. By offering Central Asian tribes higher prices for raw silk if they bypassed Persian middlemen, he sparked revolts along Persia's northern borders. Within a decade, Persia was forced to negotiate favorable terms with Constantinople, all without a single battle. Similarly, when Tibetan King Songtsen Gampo married both a Chinese princess and a Nepalese queen in the 7th century, the brides came with Buddhist monks, artisans, and crucially, access to new trade corridors. His kingdom transformed overnight from a remote mountain stronghold into a cultural crossroads, proving that royal marriages were less about romance than economic zoning laws. Sometimes the diplomacy unfolded through carefully curated gifts. The Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid once sent Charlemagne an automated water clock accompanied by Jewish engineers to maintain it, a technological marvel that doubled as a recruitment pitch for Baghdad's scientific elite. More cunning still were the tribute missions China received from nomadic tribes. These ceremonial exchanges let nomadic leaders receive lavish gifts by pretending submission, while Chinese emperors could claim foreign obedience without costly wars. The Xiongnu nomads played this game for centuries, once receiving 50,000 pounds of silk for a token show of allegiance they had no intention of honoring. The road's true peacekeeping power emerged in its grey markets. At frontier towns like Dunhuang, soldiers from rival empires often mingled in taverns, trading gossip along with goods. When tensions flared between the Tang and Tibet in the 8th century, it was Sogdian merchants who brokered ceasefires by threatening to cut off both sides' access to steel and war horses. Even the feared Mongols understood this calculus. Genghis Khan exempted merchants from taxation if they provided intelligence, creating an early version of diplomatic immunity. Perhaps the most astonishing case unfolded in the shadow of war. During Rome's brutal conflicts with Parthia, trade never ceased. Armenian middlemen became masters of compartmentalization, selling Roman glass to Parthian nobles while discreetly relaying peace feelers between generals. This unspoken rule that commerce transcended battle lines kept the Silk Road alive through centuries of conflict. When a Tang general once proposed poisoning Central Asian water sources to cripple nomadic rivals, his advisors recoiled not for moral reasons, but economic ones. Dead merchants paid no taxes. The legacy of this trade diplomacy still echoes in modern statecraft. The United States Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe with railroads and factories, but China's Belt and Road Initiative revives an ancient playbook, building ports and highways along the old Silk Route while quietly expanding influence. Just as medieval Kashgar thrived by hosting rival envoys in adjacent caravansarais, today's Dubai and Singapore flourish as neutral grounds where geopolitical adversaries still shake hands over shipping contracts. The currencies and commodities have changed, but the game remains the same. The softest power often grows not from the edge of a sword, but from the promise of what lies at the next market stall. For every merchant who struck gold along the Silk Road, there were 10 who vanished without a trace. The same dunes that shimmered with promise under the midday sun became hunting grounds by moonlight, where bandits moved like shadows between the rocks. These weren't petty thieves, they were sophisticated operators who knew exactly where caravans would bottleneck in mountain passes or slow to cross shallow rivers. Some even posed as helpful guides, offering to lead traders through secret shortcuts that ended in ambush. The infamous Red Eyebrow Gang of the Taklamakan Desert left a macabre calling card, piles of bleached camel bones arranged in arrows pointing toward their next target. Piracy wasn't confined to land. The spice routes threading through the Malacca Strait saw Javanese pirates use fire ships, old vessels set ablaze and sent drifting into crowded harbors to cause chaos. When Chinese Admiral Zheng his treasure fleets patrolled these waters in the 15th century, they didn't just carry silks. They transported judges and executioners to dispense on-the-spot justice to captured raiders. But the most audacious thieves often wore official robes. Corrupt border inspectors along the Hexi corridor developed a devious trick. They'd lose merchants' travel permits, then demand exorbitant fees to issue replacements. One Tang Dynasty scroll recounts how an entire caravan was stranded for months when inspectors discovered their paperwork had expired the day after issuance. What made these risks tolerable was the ingenious insurance system that evolved. Sogdian merchants pioneered what we'd now call risk-pooling. Caravans would each contribute 5% of their cargo to a shared emergency fund. If bandits struck one group, the fund covered their losses, ensuring no single trader faced ruin. Persian astrologers even offered security forecasts, interpreting planetary movements to advise clients on safe travel windows. But the ultimate safeguard was deception. Wealthy Armenian traders sewed gemstones into the linings of their horses' saddles, while Nestorian Christian merchants hid frankincense inside hollowed-out loaves of bread. The line between predator and protector often blurred. Many oasis towns employed former bandits as caravan guards, reasoning that only a thief could outthink a thief. The Lop Norwegians' so-called Sand Police were actually a reformed raider clan who charged steep fees to escort caravans past their old hiding spots. Even empires played both sides. When the Tang dynasty needed extra revenue, officials would quietly leak caravan schedules to allied nomadic tribes, then split the ransom money after the kidnapping. Perhaps the most surprising victims were the bandits themselves. The legendary outlaw Ahmad the Leech supposedly stole enough silk to blanket the desert, only to die when his hidden cave collapsed under the weight of hoarded treasure. His fate became a cautionary tale whispered along the route. The Silk Road gave generously, but only to those who kept the goods moving. In the end, the constant dance between risk and reward didn't weaken the trade networks, it tempered them into something resilient, proving that danger wasn't the antithesis of commerce, but its strange and necessary partner. On a windswept cliff near Dunhuang, a Chinese painter dipped his brush in indigo made from Afghan lapis lazuli, tracing the graceful curves of a Buddha whose face bore the distinct features of Gandharan art, a blend of Greek realism and Indian spirituality. This single mural captures the Silk Road's best-kept secret. Its most enduring exports weren't goods, but the invisible cargo of ideas that reshaped civilizations. When Buddhist monks first hitched rides on merchant caravans leaving India, they carried no silk or spices, just palm leaf manuscripts, and a radical new way of seeing the world. By the time these teachings reached China, they'd absorbed Persian fire altars, Greek-inspired temple architecture, and even Central Asian shamanic rituals, evolving into a faith unrecognizable to its origins yet perfectly suited to its new home. The fusion went far beyond religion. In Samarkand's bustling markets, a Persian poet might recite verses inspired by Indian epics to an audience of Turkish nomads, while Chinese diplomats marveled at Roman glassware depicting scenes from the Iliad, a story they'd never heard but whose artistry transcended language. The Tarim Basin's mummies tell a startling tale. Blonde-haired, tartan-clad Europeans buried with Chinese jade and Mesopotamian beads, their very existence proving that cultural mixing wasn't just common, it was inevitable. Even food became a passport for traditions. When noodles traveled west from China, they returned centuries later as pasta carried by Arab traders to Italy, while Central Asian fermented horse milk evolved into yogurt through Persian kitchens before reaching Turkish breakfast tables. Languages twisted and merged in the trade winds. Sogdian merchants invented a hybrid script blending Aramaic letters with Chinese brushstrokes, while the Uyghurs adapted the Syrian alphabet to write Mongolian, an early example of globalization's linguistic alchemy. The word tea traces this linguistic relay perfectly. Starting as cha in Chinese, it became chai in Persian, then shai in Arabic before reaching Russia as che. More surprising were the unintended exchanges. When Chinese papermaking reached Baghdad in the 8th century, it didn't just revolutionize bookkeeping, it enabled the Islamic Golden Age by making Greek philosophy texts affordable and portable. Similarly, the humble stirrup, likely invented by Central Asian nomads, didn't just help riders stay mounted, it reshaped medieval warfare by enabling armored knights to wield heavy lances. Artistic styles morphed in ways that would shock purists today. A 7th century Tang Dynasty ceramic horse bears the unmistakable influence of Greek realism in its muscular haunches, while Afghan Buddha statues sport wavy Apollo-like hair and drape togas straight from Hellenistic sculpture. The most striking fusion appeared in music. Persian lutes became the Chinese pipa, while Turkic throat singing merged with Indian ragas to create new scales that would later influence both Sufi chants and Byzantine hymns. Even fashion became fluid. Persian trousers, considered scandalously barbaric by early Chinese elites, became mainstream Tang attire after imperial bodyguards adopted them for horseback riding, while Byzantine nobles flaunted Chinese-style wide sleeves as exotic status symbols. Perhaps no exchange was more unexpected than the spread of games. Chess traveled from India to Persia, where it acquired its modern pieces. Viziers became queens. Elephants transformed into bishops before reaching Europe via Muslim Spain. Meanwhile, the Chinese game of Go captivated Korean scholars who introduced it to Japanese courtiers, creating a ripple effect of strategic thinking across East Asia. These weren't just pastimes, they were cognitive bridges, teaching players from different cultures to anticipate each other's moves both on and off the board. The Silk Road's greatest legacy wasn't any single invention or artwork, but the revolutionary idea that culture isn't property, it's a conversation. When a Nestorian Christian church stood beside a Zoroastrian fire temple in Chang'an, or when Buddhist monasteries in Afghanistan preserved Greek medical texts that Europe had forgotten, they proved that knowledge thrives when it crosses borders. This fluidity sometimes sparked backlash. Tang officials periodically banned foreign music as corrupting, while Islamic scholars debated whether Greek logic undermined faith, but the genie couldn't be rebutted. Like the caravans that carried them, ideas refused to stay put, mingling and mutating until their origins became impossible to untangle. What emerged was something unprecedented, a shared Eurasian consciousness. A Turkic prince might quote Confucius while wearing Sasanian silk and worshipping a Buddha with Greek features, his very existence a living mosaic of the continent's interconnectedness. The Silk Road didn't just transport culture, it redefined what culture could be, proving that the most powerful creations often emerge not from isolation, but from the spaces in between. Papermaking didn't just travel the Silk Road, it rewrote history in its journey. When Chinese artisans first pressed mulberry bark into thin sheets during the Han Dynasty, they couldn't have imagined their invention would one day fuel the Renaissance. But by the 8th century, the secret had slipped beyond China's borders after the Abbasid Caliphate captured papermakers during a battle near the Talas River. Baghdad scholars quickly realized this lightweight, durable material was far superior to fragile papyrus or costly parchment. Soon, paper mills sprung up across the Muslim world, their products circulating alongside spices and silks. The ripple effects were staggering. Where a single Byzantine Bible once required the skins of 200 sheep, now affordable paper made books accessible to merchants and students alike. By the time paper reached Europe via Islamic Spain in the 12th century, it had already transformed education, bureaucracy, and scientific exchange across 3 continents. Gunpowder's westward journey was even more explosive. Originally a Taoist alchemist's failed attempt at immortality in 9th century China, this volatile mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal became the ultimate geopolitical game changer. Mongol armies weaponized it during their conquests, terrifying enemies with fire lances and primitive grenades. But the real tipping point came when gunpowder technology leaked to the Middle East through defecting engineers. The Ottomans didn't just adopt Chinese cannons, they perfected them, creating massive siege weapons like the bronze bombard that shattered Constantinople's walls in 1453. Suddenly, stone fortresses that had stood impregnable for centuries crumbled in weeks, rewriting the rules of warfare forever. Europe's frantic scramble to acquire gunpowder recipes sparked an arms race that would eventually propel Western powers to global dominance. Less lethal but equally transformative were the humble technologies that reshaped daily life. The spinning wheel, likely originating in India, revolutionized textile production when it reached Europe via Persian and Arab traders. Suddenly, what took weeks to spin by hand could be completed in days, making fabrics cheaper and fueling the rise of medieval fashion cultures. Meanwhile, Central Asian nomads contributed the composite bow, a masterpiece of engineering combining wood, horn, and sinew, whose range and power gave Mongol archers terrifying battlefield advantages. Even something as simple as the astrolabe, refined by Islamic scholars using Greek and Indian astronomy, became the GPS of its age, allowing sailors and caravans to navigate with unprecedented precision. Perhaps the most underappreciated transfer was the concept of zero. Indian mathematicians had treated zero as a number for centuries, but it took Arab scholars encountering these ideas in Baghdad's markets to synthesize them into the decimal system we use today. When Fibonacci introduced this system to Europe in the 13th century after studying with North African traders, it revolutionized banking, architecture, and eventually computer science. The Silk Road didn't just move goods, it moved the very building blocks of modernity. What made these exchanges so explosive was their unpredictability. Chinese officials never intended gunpowder to become a weapon, just as Persian glassmakers didn't realize their furnace techniques would later enable Galileo's telescopes. Technologies morphed to fit new environments. Central Asian saddle designs became the foundation for European knights' war mounts, while Chinese compasses adapted for desert travel evolved into maritime navigation tools. The route's true genius lay in its serendipity. A chance conversation between a Persian mathematician and an Indian trader in a Samarkand caravansarai might spark breakthroughs in algebra, or a spilled crate of Chinese porcelain could inspire Ottoman potters to invent new glazes. This technological free-for-all had its casualties too. When paper flooded Islamic markets, Egypt's papyrus industry collapsed. As steel-making techniques spread from India to Damascus and Toledo, once unique blades became commodities. But the net effect was undeniable. By connecting disparate pools of knowledge, the Silk Road accelerated human progress at a pace unseen until the digital age. The next time you check your smartphone, whose lithium batteries trace their lineage to Central Asian metallurgy, remember, we're still riding the same wave of innovation those camel caravans set in motion centuries ago. The same caravans that carried silks and spices also carried something far deadlier, a microscopic stowaway that would rewrite history in blood. When Mongol troops besieged the Genos trading post of Kaffa in 1346, they didn't know the rotting corpses they catapulted over the walls carried more than fear. Fleeing merchants carried the Black Death to Mediterranean ports, but the plague's journey had begun much earlier, hitching rides in the fur-lined saddlebags of Mongol pony express riders and the grain sacks of Central Asian traders. The Silk Road, that glittering network of commerce, had become the perfect transmission belt for catastrophe. What made the outbreak so devastating was the very infrastructure that made the route prosperous. Rest stops designed to shelter hundreds of merchants now incubated disease, their crowded courtyards and shared drinking troughs turning into petri dishes. The famed caravansarais, once symbols of safe passage, became waypoints of death. Archaeologists have found mass graves beneath their foundations, piled with victims still clutching silk bundles they'd hoped to trade. Even the relay system that sped messages across continents became a liability, with fresh riders unknowingly carrying infected fleas to new regions faster than any warning could travel. The economic collapse was swift and brutal. In Egypt, where spice caravans once fed thriving markets, the price of pepper plummeted because so few buyers remained alive to purchase it. Venetian glassmakers, their workshops emptied by the plague, took state-mandated apprenticeships to keep their techniques from vanishing entirely. The Yuan dynasty in China, already weakened by internal strife, saw entire tax districts wiped out, their records filled with ghost names of households that no longer existed. Ironically, the few who prospered were the survivors. With labor scarce, European peasants could suddenly demand higher wages, while Persian weavers found their textiles tripling in value as competitors perished. But the plague's deepest impact was psychological. For centuries, the Silk Road had symbolized connection and opportunity. Now it represented invisible danger. Quarantine measures born in Venetian ports spread along trade routes, with merchants forced to wait 40 days quaranta in Italian before entering cities. Some kingdoms took drastic steps. The Sultan of Delhi allegedly ordered all maritime trade halted for 5 years, while Ming Dynasty officials burned foreign goods in paranoid cleansing rituals. The once fluid movement of people and ideas hardened into suspicion, with travelers viewed as potential carriers of death rather than prosperity. Yet even devastation couldn't sever the Silk Road completely. Within decades, caravans were moving again, though forever changed. The plague had exposed the fragility of interconnectedness, but also its inevitability. Like merchants hedging bets after a storm, societies rebuilt their trade networks with new precautions: wider spacing between caravans, stricter health inspections at oasis towns. The Black Death wasn't the end of globalization. It was its first great stress test, proving that even when the road carried darkness, humanity would always relight the lanterns and keep walking. Marco Polo's name conjures images of a lone Venetian adventurer traversing exotic lands, but the truth behind his legendary travels is far more complex. When his memoirs, The Travels of Marco Polo, first circulated in 13th century Europe, they read like something between a merchant's ledger and a fantastical odyssey, filled with descriptions of paper money, coal-burning stoves, and cities so grand they dwarfed anything in Christendom. Skeptics at the time dismissed his accounts as fabrications, asking how a man could witness black stones that burned like wood or a postal system faster than any European courier. Yet modern archaeology has vindicated many of these details, proving Polo didn't just visit the East, he documented it with startling accuracy for someone writing from memory years later. The real controversy lies not in what Polo saw, but in what he supposedly didn't. Critics point out glaring omissions: no mention of the Great Wall, tea drinking, or Chinese calligraphy, all central to Yuan dynasty life. Some historians argue he may have compiled stories from Persian and Mongol traders in Constantinople, weaving second-hand tales into a first-person narrative. The most damning evidence: Venetian archives list Polo as a merchant dealing in gems and silks from the Black Sea region, but contain no definitive proof he traveled farther east than Crimea. Could Europe's most famous explorer have been a brilliant compiler of others' experiences rather than a true eyewitness? What's undeniable is Polo's impact. His descriptions of Kublai Khan's court, where Mongol rulers wore robes spun from golden threads and dined on dishes kept warm with mercury, ignited Europe's imagination. When he wrote about the Chinese city of Hangzhou with its 12,000 bridges and paved streets lit by lanterns, it sounded less like a real place and more like a vision of utopia. These accounts didn't just entertain, they reshaped geography. Columbus carried a heavily annotated copy of Polo's book on his 1492 voyage, hoping to reach the Spice Islands Polo described. Instead, he stumbled upon the Americas, making Polo's work one of history's most consequential travel guides, accurate or not. The Silk Road's true gift to Polo's legacy wasn't just the miles he may have walked, it was the cultural translation he performed. By framing Mongol-ruled China not as a land of barbarians, but as a civilization more advanced than Europe in everything from paper currency to public granaries, he challenged medieval prejudices. His account of asbestos cloth that could be cleaned by throwing it into fire wasn't just a marvel, it hinted at material science beyond Western understanding. Even his much-debated role as a Yuan dynasty official, if true, reveals how the Silk Road rewarded linguistic and diplomatic skills over brute force. Perhaps Polo's greatest twist is that his factual accuracy matters less than his catalytic effect. Whether he personally witnessed Hangzhou's splendor or merely documented others' accounts, his book became a bridge between worlds. The Silk Road had always thrived on stories as much as silk tales of distant lands that lured merchants to take the next risky journey. In that sense, Marco Polo wasn't just a traveler or a fabulist, but the living embodiment of the route's most enduring power, the ability to make the unimaginable feel within reach. The Mongols didn't just ride across the steppes, they rewrote the rules of empire. When Genghis Khan unified the warring tribes of Mongolia in the early 13th century, he didn't stop at creating another nomadic confederation. He built something unprecedented, a transcontinental superhighway of trade, where a merchant could travel from Beijing to Budapest without once being robbed. The secret wasn't just the Mongols' fearsome reputation, it was their radical understanding that wealth flowed more reliably from customs taxes than from pillaged villages. Under the Pax Mongolica, the Silk Road didn't just survive, it thrived like never before. Mongol patrols exterminated bandit clans along the entire route, while their Yam postal stations, spaced a day's ride apart, functioned as both rest stops and intelligence hubs. Traders received something priceless, a paisa, a golden passport granting safe passage and access to fresh horses at any station. The system was so efficient that Marco Polo marveled at messengers who could cover 300 miles in a single day, a network faster than anything in Europe until the 19th century. But the real innovation was economic. The Mongols standardized weights, introduced paper money backed by silk and silver reserves, and even enforced strict quality control. Persian historians recorded instances where officials executed merchants caught selling dyed glass as rubies, a brutal but effective deterrent against fraud. What made the Mongol approach revolutionary wasn't just their tolerance of foreign customs, it was their active cultivation of expertise. When they captured Beijing, they didn't slaughter the city's bureaucrats, they put them to work managing the empire's finances. Persian engineers designed siege engines for their armies, while Uyghur scribes adapted the Syrian alphabet to write Mongolian. In Karakorum, the imperial capital, you'd find Nestorian Christian priests debating Buddhist monks, Muslim merchants trading with Venetian bankers, and Chinese physicians prescribing Tibetan herbs. This wasn't multiculturalism out of idealism, it was pragmatism. Every faith and ethnicity represented another revenue stream, another diplomatic channel, another pool of talent to exploit. The scale of their trade network boggles the mind. At its peak, the empire controlled every major Silk Road terminus from the Yellow River to the Danube. A single caravan leaving Khwarezm might carry Siberian furs, Indian diamonds, and Byzantine gold brocade, all destined for markets in Hangzhou or Tabriz. The Mongols even pioneered early forms of venture capitalism, offering interest-free loans to stranded merchants through their Ortog system, provided they shared profits upon safe return. This economic web made the Khans staggeringly rich. When Marco Polo described Kublai Khan's summer palace, its walls lined with gold leaf and leopard skins, he wasn't exaggerating. Mongol tax records show the dynasty extracted over 12,000 tons of silver annually from China alone. Yet the true measure of their success lies in what didn't happen. For nearly a century, there were no major wars between the civilizations they connected. No Persian armies clashed with Chinese forces, no European crusaders marched against Muslim caliphs because the Mongols controlled all the battlegrounds and they preferred caravans to carnage. Even their infamous violence served trade interests. When the Khwarezmian Shah executed Mongol envoys in 1219, Genghis Khan didn't just retaliate, he obliterated every city along the Shah's trade routes, ensuring future rulers understood the cost of disrupting commerce. The empire's collapse revealed just how vital their system had been. As the Khanates fractured in the 14th century, bandits returned to the Silk Road, tariffs skyrocketed, and entire cities like Samarkand withered without protection. Ironically, the Black Death which spread along those same trade routes became the final nail in the coffin, but the Mongol legacy endured in unexpected ways. Their relay stations inspired later postal systems from the Ottoman Empire to the Pony Express. Their tolerance of religions set precedents for pluralistic states. And their vision of a borderless marketplace foreshadowed modern globalization. For all their fearsome reputation, the Mongols grasped a fundamental truth: conquest could seize wealth, but only connection could sustain it. Their empire didn't just span continents, it linked them, proving that even the fiercest horsemen could become history's most unlikely champions of free trade. The cannons that shattered Constantinople's walls in 1453 didn't just bring down an empire, they rewrote the map of global trade. For over 1,000 years, this city had been the linchpin connecting Europe to the Silk Road's riches, its harbors crowded with Venetian galleys and Genoese carracks loading spices from the east. When Sultan-maimed Roman II Ottoman forces finally breached the legendary Theodosian walls after a 53-day siege, they weren't just claiming a city, they were slamming shut Christendom's back door to the Orient. Almost overnight, the carefully balanced system of tariffs, treaties, and trade concessions that had funneled silks and spices westward collapsed like a bridge cut at both ends. European merchants suddenly faced a grim calculus. The Ottomans, now controlling both the Bosporus and the overland routes through Anatolia, imposed exorbitant taxes. Pepper prices in Venice quadrupled within a decade. But the real crisis was one of access. Italian traders who once negotiated directly with Mongol and Persian merchants now had to plead with Ottoman middlemen who deliberately slowed shipments to manipulate markets. A single incident captures the desperation. When a Venetian envoy offered maimed Roman II an annual tribute of 10,000 ducats to maintain trading rights, the Sultan laughed and demanded 30,000 instead, enough to bankrupt most European spice houses. What seemed like catastrophe became history's greatest accidental catalyst. Blocked from traditional overland routes, Portugal's Prince Henry the Navigator had already been probing south along Africa's coast, seeking a way around the Islamic world's grip. With Constantinople's fall, his project transformed from curiosity to existential necessity. By 1488, Bartholomew Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope, proving Asia could be reached by sea. 5 years later, Columbus, armed with maps influenced by Silk Road cartography preserved in Constantinople before its fall, stumbled upon the Americas while searching for a western route to the Indies. The age of oceanic empires had begun, not because of new technology or ambition, but because an old gateway had slammed shut. The ripple effects reached far beyond trade routes. Constantinople's intellectual exodus, Byzantine scholars fleeing with precious manuscripts, ignited the Renaissance as Greek philosophy and science flooded into Italy. Meanwhile, the Ottomans inherited not just a city, but an entire economic ecosystem. They repurposed the Byzantine gold solidus into the Ottoman axe, maintained the Genoese quarters trading privileges, and even kept Italian architects to rebuild the city's shattered infrastructure. This pragmatism revealed a profound truth. The Silk Road had never truly been about specific cities or empires, but about the relentless flow of goods and ideas. When one door closed, humanity simply found or forced another open. Perhaps the greatest irony lies in what happened to the victors. As Europe's oceanic routes flourished, the Ottomans found themselves masters of a declining asset. The very overland networks they now controlled were becoming obsolete. their tax revenues shrinking as Portuguese caravels brought spices directly from India. By the 1500s, Venetian merchants noted with satisfaction that Ottoman officials were secretly buying pepper from European ships in the Red Sea, the conquerors becoming clients of the system they disrupted. The fall of Constantinople didn't just launch the age of exploration. It proved that in global trade there are no permanent gatekeepers, only temporary bottlenecks waiting to be circumvented. The winds off the Atlantic carried more than salt spray, they carried the scent of desperation. By the late 15th century, Portugal's King John Roman II faced a crisis that would have crushed lesser rulers. The old Silk Road, once a golden highway of commerce, had become a gauntlet of Ottoman tolls and shifting alliances. Pepper that once flowed freely through Alexandria now trickled into Europe at prices that could bankrupt kingdoms. But where others saw dead ends, the Portuguese saw waves endless, open, and free for the taking. Their solution wasn't to beg for scraps from the Ottomans, but to leapfrog them entirely by mastering the sea. Vasco da Gama's 1498 voyage around Africa's Cape of Good Hope wasn't just exploration. It was economic warfare by sail. His 4 ships, barely larger than fishing vessels by modern standards, carried not just sailors but a radical blueprint for global trade. When they dropped anchor in Calicut, India, the local Zamorin ruler barely glanced at their tattered banners. But the Portuguese weren't there to impress kings, they came for the black gold piled in spice warehouses. Pepper, cinnamon, cardamom, all now within reach without a single camel or Ottoman middleman. The math was brutal in its simplicity. Where overland caravans took 18 months and lost half their cargo to bandits and taxes, a well-timed monsoon could fill a ship's hold in weeks. What followed was less a trade revolution than a corporate takeover of the high seas. Portugal didn't just sail to Asia, they weaponized geography. By seizing choke points like Hormuz at the Persian Gulf's mouth and Malacca guarding the Spice Islands, they transformed the ocean into a toll road. Their carracks, armed with cannons capable of sinking entire fleets, didn't just transport goods, they enforced monopolies. One captain's log chillingly records burning Arab dhows loaded with pepper to teach the Moors the price of defiance. The Venetians, watching their spice warehouses empty as Lisbon's overflowed, begged the Ottomans for help, not realizing the game had changed forever. This maritime pivot reshaped power structures in ways the Silk Road never could. Where inland empires like the Mongols taxed caravans passing through their territory, naval powers now extracted wealth at the source. Portuguese feitorias fortified trading posts from Mozambique to Macau functioned like medieval offshore tax havens, skimming profits before goods even began their journey. The psychological impact was equally profound. For millennia, wealth had flowed overland. Now, maps reoriented to privileged coastlines. Cities like Lisbon and Amsterdam, once backwaters, became nerve centers of global commerce, while legendary Silk Road metropolises like Samarkand found themselves stranded inland like beached whales. Yet the sea route's greatest disruption was invisible. They democratized access to luxury. Where a single pound of pepper once cost a European laborer months of wages, Portuguese bulk shipping slashed prices by 80% within decades. Suddenly, middle-class households could afford spices previously reserved for royalty, and merchants traded not just in goods but in futures, betting on harvests half a world away. The risks remained staggering. Da Gama lost half his crew to scurvy on his maiden voyage, but the rewards redefined nations. In 1506, a single Portuguese cargo of Malabar pepper yielded a profit equivalent to 60 tons of gold, bankrolling an empire that would stretch from Brazil to Japan. The ocean's triumph wasn't inevitable. For centuries, China's Ming Dynasty had possessed superior naval technology, with Zheng He's treasure ships dwarfing Portuguese carracks. But where the Portuguese saw commerce as conquest, the Ming saw only expense, dismantling their fleet in a fit of isolationism. This divergence captures the sea route's true lesson. In globalization's next chapter, adaptability trumped tradition, and those who embraced chaos on the waves inherited the earth. The Silk Road didn't vanish overnight. Caravans still plied the Taklamakan into the 19th century, but its golden age had passed, its legacy carried not by camel bells, but by the creak of rigging and the cry of gulls over uncharted waters. The camel caravans didn't vanish overnight, but the writing was on the wall, or rather, on the shifting tides of global commerce. By the 16th century, a Portuguese merchant could ship a ton of pepper from India to Lisbon for less than it cost to transport the same load by camel from Aleppo to Constantinople. The math was merciless. Where a land caravan might lose a third of its cargo to bandits, taxes, and spoilage, a well-built carrack could deliver spices faster, cheaper, and in quantities that made Silk Road trade look like a trickle. The ocean routes didn't just compete with the overland network, they rendered it obsolete in the way a highway bypasses a dirt track. Political earthquakes accelerated the decline. The once unified Mongol Empire had fractured into squabbling khanates, each imposing arbitrary tariffs that strangled long-distance trade. Cities like Samarkand, which had thrived as cosmopolitan hubs, withered into provincial backwaters as their tax revenues evaporated. Even the mighty Ottomans, who controlled key Silk Road termini, found themselves trapped in a paradox. Their very dominance over land routes pushed European powers to seek alternatives by sea. When the Safavid dynasty in Persia embraced Shia Islam as the state religion in the 16th century, it severed centuries-old ties with Sunni trading partners, further fragmenting the overland network. Yet the Silk Road's death knell wasn't just economic or political, it was environmental. Centuries of intensive grazing by caravan animals had turned stretches of the Central Asian steppe into dust bowls, while deforestation along the Tarim Basin left oases vulnerable to encroaching sand. Travelers who once marveled at the lush orchards of Merv now described a ghost town half buried in dunes. The very geography that had nurtured the route was unraveling, leaving caravans to navigate an ever more hostile landscape. But to say the Silk Road ended misses its true legacy. Its spirit migrated into the trade winds filling Portuguese sails, the Venetian ledgers tracking spice futures, even the Spanish silver mined in the Americas to buy Chinese silk. The road's greatest innovation wasn't its path, but its principle. That connection breeds prosperity. When British East India Company agents set up shop in Canton, they were playing by rules written a millennium earlier by Sogdian merchants. The tea clippers racing across the Indian Ocean were heirs to the caravans that once carried jade to Xi'an. Perhaps the most enduring proof lies in the unexpected survivals. In the deserts of Xinjiang, Uyghur traders still follow ancestral routes to sell raisins and walnuts, their donkey carts sharing highways with container trucks. The Venetian glass beads that once bought African gold now fill museum cases, while their modern equivalents, cheap plastic trinkets, circle the globe by container ship. The Silk Road didn't disappear. It dissolved into the bloodstream of globalization, its DNA visible in everything from multinational supply chains to the fusion cuisines of immigrant neighborhoods. What began as a trickle of jade and silk became a tide that reshaped the world not by the road itself, but by the unshakable idea it represented, that no empire, no matter how powerful, can thrive in isolation. The camels may have stopped walking, but the conversations they started never truly ended. Beneath the shifting sands of the Taklamakan Desert, a team of archaeologists brushes dust from a wooden tablet, revealing words written in a dead language over 1,000 years ago. This isn't just any text, it's a bill of sale for a shipment of jade, complete with the buyer's complaint about quality and the seller's defensive scribble in the margins. Such discoveries are rewriting history one shovel of dirt at a time, proving the Silk Road wasn't just a route for goods, but a living network where ordinary people haggled, gossiped, and forged connections across continents. Recent digs at the ancient city of Nia have uncovered something astonishing: a Roman-style glass bowl buried alongside Han Dynasty coins and Indian ivory. How did this Mediterranean treasure end up in a Tarim Basin oasis? The answer lies in the fingerprints preserved on its surface, revealing it passed through at least 6 owners, each leaving tiny traces of their journey. Nearby, researchers found a bundle of well-preserved kaftans woven from Iranian wool but tailored in Chinese styles, evidence of a fashion fusion that predates modern globalization by 15 centuries. But the real game changers are the documents. In the caves near Dunhuang, librarians of a forgotten Buddhist monastery sealed away nearly 50,000 manuscripts, shopping lists, divorce papers, even children's doodles before fleeing invaders. Among them was the world's oldest surviving printed book, the Diamond Sutra from 868, but equally revealing are the mundane scraps. A Sogdian merchant's ledger details interest rates on silver loans, while a Tang Dynasty customs form lists 1 damaged camel, 2 bolts of inferior silk as taxable goods. These aren't just artifacts, they're snapshots of a world where paperwork traveled as far as the people who carried it. Technology is revealing secrets invisible to the naked eye. Multispectral imaging on a seemingly blank scrap of parchment from a Kyrgyzstan dig site uncovered erased Greek medical texts rewritten with Buddhist prayers, a palimpsest of cultural exchange. Meanwhile, DNA analysis of chewing gum birch tar with tooth marks found at a Kazakh caravansarai traced saliva from individuals of East Asian, Persian, and Slavic ancestry, all frequenting the same roadside stop. Perhaps the most poignant find came from a Xiongnu noble's tomb in Mongolia, a Chinese lacquer box filled with Central Asian raisins, wrapped in Byzantine cloth and buried with a note, "For your journey." This single artifact encapsulates the Silk Road's essence, not just the movement of goods, but the blending of traditions, where even death rituals became cross-cultural collaborations. As satellite imagery identifies hundreds of unexplored sites along ancient routes, one truth becomes clear: every shard of pottery, every faded ink stroke, adds another stitch to the tapestry of human connection. The real treasure isn't gold or silk, it's the realization that our ancestors were far more interconnected than we ever imagined, bound by the same hopes, disputes, and creativity that drive us today. The financial fingerprints of the Silk Road are all around us, in the letters of credit tucked into a businessman's briefcase, the insurance policies protecting cargo ships, even the stock tickers flashing on Wall Street screens. What began as camel caravans haggling over bolts of silk evolved into the first sophisticated economic ecosystem, where trust traveled farther than any single merchant ever could. Picture a Sogdian trader in 8th century Samarkand handing over a scrap of paper promising payment to a Chinese silk producer, a transaction backed not by gold in his pouch, but by his reputation within a network of diaspora communities stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Yellow River. This was the birth of banking beyond borders, a system where your word in one city could unlock goods in another 1,000 miles away. The real innovation wasn't the goods themselves, but the financial instruments that greased the wheels of trade. Persian caravan leaders issued early versions of checks called softojas, redeemable at partner offices in Baghdad or Constantinople, while Jewish merchants in Cairo perfected the art of the bill of exchange, a medieval version of wire transfers that let money move without physically changing hands. Even insurance got its start in the caravansarais, where groups of merchants pooled funds to cover losses from bandit attacks or sandstorms, creating the first underwriting networks. The genius of these systems lay in their decentralization. No emperor or sultan controlled them, yet they functioned across war zones and shifting borders with remarkable consistency. Globalization as we know it today owes its DNA to these ancient practices. When a Tang dynasty official standardized silk bolts as a form of currency, each bolt's value tied to its length and weight, he was inadvertently creating the first commodity-backed currency system. Centuries later, the Mongols would expand this idea by issuing paper money backed by silk reserves, a precursor to modern fiat currencies. The Silk Road also birthed early versions of franchising. Armenian merchants established family-run trade colonies from Crimea to Canton, each branch maintaining identical accounting methods and quality standards, much like modern multinational corporations. Perhaps most strikingly, the route's economic legacy survives in our very conception of value. The word credit comes from the Latin credere, meaning to believe, a fitting legacy for a system built on trust between strangers separated by deserts and languages. Next time you swipe a credit card or track a package crossing continents in real time, remember, you're not just participating in commerce, but continuing a conversation that began when the first Silk Road merchant handed over his goods and trusted the universe, or at least the caravan network, to bring payment back. The echoes of camel bells still resonate in the hum of modern cargo ships, as China's Belt and Road Initiative revives an ancient playbook for the 21st century. Just as Silk Road caravans once linked Xi'an to Rome, this ambitious infrastructure network stretches from Pacific ports to European rail hubs, weaving a new tapestry of economic influence. But the parallels run deeper than mere geography. Both systems reveal how trade routes, then and now, serve as levers of power far beyond their commercial value. When Chinese engineers build highways in Pakistan or ports in Greece, they're not just moving goods, they're replaying a strategy perfected by Silk Road middlemen 2,000 years ago. Control the arteries of commerce, and you shape the destiny of nations. Consider the financing. Ancient Sogdian merchants pioneered long-distance credit systems, trusting that reputation would ensure repayment across thousands of miles. Today, China's development banks offer loans with similar long-game calculus funding power plants in Africa or railways in Southeast Asia, creating dependencies that outlast construction timelines. Like the caravansarais that once dotted the Taklamakan, Belt and Road projects often come with strings attached, preferential access for Chinese firms, strategic port leases, or political alignment on international issues. It's a modern twist on the old Silk Road principle that the real profit lies not in the cargo, but in who controls the route. The diplomatic playbook feels equally familiar. Just as Tang Dynasty emperors used silk as both gift and weapon, bestowing bolts upon allied nomadic chieftains while withholding them from rivals, today's infrastructure investments double as geopolitical chess moves. A railway through Laos reduces regional dependence on Vietnamese ports, much like medieval Samarkand diverted caravans from rival cities. Sri Lanka's Hambantota port, controversially leased to China after debt defaults, mirrors how medieval Venice and Genoa jockeyed for control of Byzantine harbors. Even the backlash follows ancient patterns. India's resistance to Belt and Road mirrors Persian efforts to block Byzantine access to Central Asian silk markets 15 centuries ago. Yet the most telling parallel lies in the cultural alchemy these projects enable. just as Silk Road cities became melting pots where Persian astronomers debated Greek mathematicians over Chinese tea, Belt and Road has spawned hybrid spaces, from Kenyan rail towns where Swahili and Mandarin mix, to Serbian industrial zones blending European engineering with Asian capital. The initiative even revives the Silk Road's role as a transmission belt for technology, with Chinese 5G networks and solar panels spreading alongside roads and bridges, much like papermaking and compasses once radiated from caravan stops. Critics warn of debt-trap diplomacy, but history offers nuance. The medieval caravansarai system also created dependencies. Oasis towns thrived when trade flowed, then starved when routes shifted. Yet most communities calculated the trade-off as worthwhile. Just as many belt and road host nations accept risks for development gains, the key lesson from antiquity is that such networks rarely benefit all parties equally. For every Samarkand that grew rich as a middleman, there was a Rome hemorrhaging silver to buy Eastern luxuries. Today, as Malaysia renegotiates rail projects or Montenegro grapples with Chinese loans, they're confronting the same eternal trade-off between short-term infrastructure and long-term leverage. What ultimately unites ancient and modern is the recognition that trade routes are never neutral. Whether paved with stone or fiber optic cable, they amplify some voices while silencing others, empower certain regions while bypassing rivals. When a Silk Road merchant paid tolls to Parthian guards, or when a Kazakh oil refinery now processes Chinese crude, both participate in systems where commerce and conquest blur. The Belt and Road Initiative isn't just rebuilding roads, it's resurrecting an ancient truth. Whoever writes the map controls the future, and sometimes the most enduring empires are those built not on battlefields, but on shipping manifests and balance sheets. Somewhere between the shifting dunes and mountain passes, the Silk Road birthed legends as vast as the landscapes it crossed. Travelers whispered of cities swallowed by the Taklamakan sands, entire metropolises buried with their treasures intact, where jade statues of forgotten kings still guarded vaults of silk and spice. The most famous of these lost kingdoms, Cotton, supposedly held a secret even more precious than its famed nephrite, a subterranean grove where white jade grew like trees, watered by underground rivers. For centuries, explorers risked their lives hunting this phantom orchard, only to vanish into the same sands that supposedly preserved it. Then there were the creatures said to haunt the route's lonely stretches. Caravans trading near the Pamir Mountains told of giant raptors, rock birds, large enough to snatch camels mid-stride, likely inspired by the real-life Himalayan vultures circling overhead. Persian geographers wrote of the sand singers, spirits disguised as beautiful women whose melodies lured travelers into quicksand. But the most chilling tales came from the icy Karakoram passes, where merchants swore they'd seen translucent ice phantoms, ghosts of frozen caravan drivers preserved in glaciers, their lips still moving in silent warnings. Not all myths were born of fear. The Uyghurs spoke of a miraculous spring near Turpan whose waters could mend broken bones overnight, likely echoing real mineral hot springs famed for healing properties. Buddhist pilgrims spread tales of the music tree in Cotton, a mulberry whose leaves played melodies when wind passed through them, an early metaphor for the cultural harmony the route fostered. Even Marco Polo contributed to the lore, describing a valley in Persia where diamonds could only be harvested by throwing chunks of meat for eagles to carry to their nests, where the gems supposedly stuck. The line between fact and fantasy often blurred deliberately. Sogdian merchants spun wild stories about silk harvesting, claiming Chinese unrolled the fabric from giant underground worms to justify outrageous prices. Arabian traders told buyers that cinnamon grew in nests built by mythical birds on sheer cliffs, explaining its scarcity. these weren't just tall tales, they were early marketing tactics, transforming ordinary commodities into objects of mystery and desire. Perhaps the most enduring legend was that of Prester John, a mythical Christian king whose lost kingdom supposedly lay somewhere along the route, waiting to ally with Europe against Islamic powers. For 500 years, maps marked phantom cities where his gold-robed court held the fountain of youth and a mirror revealing distant lands. The myth persisted because it fulfilled a deeper need, the hope that beyond the known world lay not just trade goods but wonder itself. What makes these stories more than campfire tales is how they mirror the Silk Road's true nature. The sand singers embodied very real dangers of navigation, just as the ice phantoms paid tribute to those who perished crossing glaciers. The music tree symbolized the cultural fusion the route enabled, while Prester John's kingdom reflected the eternal human craving for connection beyond the horizon. Even the tallest tales carried kernels of truth. The underground jade groves likely echoed real Cottonese mines where workers tunneled beneath the earth, while Marco Polo's Diamond Valley may have described actual mining techniques using animal fat to separate gems from sediment. These legends didn't just entertain, they were the psychological scaffolding that made the route navigable. When a merchant faced the go-by's endless wastes, believing in hidden oases or guardian spirits made the journey bearable. For all its very real dangers, bandits, storms, thirst, the Silk Road thrived because people could imagine something grander lurking just beyond the next dune. In the end, the greatest treasure the route offered wasn't silk or spice, but the license to dream, to look at a windswept pass and see not just a trade lane, but a bridge between the possible and the miraculous. History books often paint the Silk Road as a world of bearded merchants and turbaned kings, but beneath those sweeping narratives lies a hidden tapestry woven by women whose influence stretched further than any caravan. In the bustling markets of Merv, Sogdian businesswomen ran sprawling textile empires, their ledgers detailing transactions that crossed linguistic and religious divides. One 7th-century contract discovered near Panjakent shows a widow named Datis negotiating a deal for 300 bolts of silk with a Chinese merchant, her seal stamped confidently beside his, proof that commerce wasn't exclusively a man's domain. These women didn't just sell goods, they built networks with matriarchs training daughters in the subtle arts of appraisal and arbitration, passing down trade secrets as carefully as any guild master. Royal women wielded power through calculated alliances. The Tang Dynasty's Princess Wencheng, sent to marry Tibet's King Songtsen Gampo in 641, wasn't merely a diplomatic bride. She traveled with an entourage of Chinese scholars, bringing Buddhism and agricultural techniques that reshaped Tibetan culture. Centuries later, the Turpan ruler Iletmish Bilge Khoton defied expectations by leading caravans herself, her bilingual edicts carved in both Old Turkic and Chinese to enforce fair trading practices along the northern routes. Even in death, women commanded respect. The mausoleum of Turajin Khoton, the only woman to rule the Mongol Empire in her own right, still stands in Kyrgyzstan, its geometric patterns blending Nestorian Christian motifs with Islamic calligraphy, a silent testament to her policy of religious tolerance. Some women turned the road's dangers into opportunities. Armenian trader female Maria of Cilicia became legendary for disguising herself as a monk to safely transport relics across Muslim-held territories, while the Uyghur horse trader Fatima al-Samarkandi kept a dagger tucked in her sash, not for defense, but to slash open bales of suspiciously light silk, exposing fraudulent padding to protect her clients. In the oasis city of Dunhuang, manuscripts reveal female scribes like the Buddhist nun Jingxiu, who copied sutras in elegant brushwork to sell to pilgrims, her workshop supplying scriptures from Constantinople to Kyoto. The most unexpected power brokers were the concubines and entertainers dismissed as mere ornaments. A 9th-century Persian traveler recounted how a Sogdian singing girl named Roxana charmed a Tibetan warlord into lowering tariffs for her merchant brother's caravan. At the Western Xia court, concubine Liang's fluency in Tangut, Mongolian, and Uyghur made her indispensable in trade negotiations, so much so that officials complained she speaks in 3 tongues and thinks in 10. These women mastered the art of soft influence, turning tea ceremonies and musical performances into venues for deal-making where men couldn't openly negotiate. What makes their stories revolutionary isn't just their roles, but how they circumvented limitations. When Islamic law restricted women from long-distance travel, Persian businesswomen like Banu Musa sisters funded caravans through silent partnerships, their names omitted from contracts but their silver backing every venture. In China, widows inherited trading licenses normally reserved for sons, with Tang court records showing female merchants like Lady Wang successfully petitioning to keep her late husband's jade monopoly. Even nomadic customs bent to necessity, Kazakh eagle huntresses like Arukhan sometimes escorted caravans through dangerous passes, their famed sharpshooting skills ensuring safe passage. The Silk Road didn't just transport spices and silks, it carried ideas about gender that shifted like desert sands. A Byzantine chronicle sneered at how Sogdian women debate men as equals in markets, while a shocked Chinese envoy reported Turkic queens presiding over military councils. These encounters slowly eroded prejudices. Tang fashionistas adopted the barbarian practicality of Central Asian trousers for horseback riding, while Persian poets began depicting merchant heroines in epics. The road's true legacy for women wasn't just economic agency, but the proof that culture is malleable, that a widow's ledger in Samarkand could weigh as heavily as a king's decree, and that sometimes the most enduring treaties were sealed not in throne rooms, but in the private chambers of women who knew the value of both silk and silver. The same camel caravans that carried silks and spices also carried an invisible cost, one etched into the very landscapes they crossed. Along the Hexi corridor, where merchants once thronged to China's western gates, archaeologists now find layers of sand burying ancient orchards, their roots withered from over-irrigation. In the Pamir Mountains, alpine meadows that fed generations of caravan animals show signs of ancient soil erosion, gullies carved not by rain, but by countless hooves pounding the same trails into dust. The Silk Road didn't just connect civilizations, it reshaped ecosystems in ways still visible today. Deforestation was the quiet casualty of commerce. Caravansarais demanded firewood for cooking and heating, stripping hillsides bare around oasis towns like Dunhuang. A single large stop could consume 50 tons of wood annually, enough to deforest an acre of fragile desert riparian zones. But the real devastation came from papermaking. As China's inventions spread west, the demand for mulberry bark, the raw material, sparked clear cutting along Central Asian river valleys. Tax records from Samarkand reveal entire villages relocated when their forests vanished, leaving behind stump-filled wastelands vulnerable to the creeping sands. The road's insatiable appetite for livestock transformed grasslands too. Bactrian camels, though hardy, required vast grazing areas during rest stops. Over centuries, their constant foraging altered plant compositions, giving invasive species like camel thorn an edge over native grasses. In the Tarim Basin, pollen studies show a dramatic decline in tamarisk and poplar, key stabilizers of desert soils, coinciding with peak Silk Road traffic. The loss of these trees triggered dust storms that eventually buried sections of the route itself. creating the very vanished cities later explorers would romanticize. Water systems bore the brunt of human ingenuity. To service caravans, engineers from Persia to China built elaborate canal systems, underground canals tapping mountain aquifers. But as trade boomed, over-extraction dropped water tables beyond recovery. The ancient city of Merv, once a lush agricultural hub, collapsed when its canals ran dry, its abandoned canals now tracing ghostly lines across the Turkmen desert. Even the famed singing sands of the Taklamakan owe their eerie tones to an unexpected factor: centuries of camel traffic grinding surface rocks into the ultra-fine grains that vibrate in the wind. Yet the most lasting damage was often accidental. Stowaway seeds in grain sacks introduced invasive plants like tumbleweed to new regions, while shipbuilding for Mediterranean spice routes decimated cedar forests from Lebanon to Cyprus. The demand for ivory and rhino horn, prized as much for medicine as ornament, pushed some species to local extinction. A Han Dynasty customs log from Dunhuang lists tiger bones as a routine export, hinting at the unseen toll on wildlife. These ancient environmental crises hold unsettling parallels to modern globalization. The overharvesting of Kashmiri saffron mirrors today's quinoa boom in the Andes, where cash crops displace staple foods. The abandoned qanats of Persia foreshadow California's sinking aquifers, both victims of unsustainable demand. Even the Silk Road's dust storms find echoes in the particulate pollution drifting from modern factories across borders. But the route also offers unexpected lessons in resilience. Some communities adapted ingeniously. Sogdian farmers developed drought-resistant crop rotations, while Tibetan herders practiced seasonal pasture rotation long before modern ecology coined the term. The Caravansarais shared resources, communal wells, centralized blacksmiths minimized redundant infrastructure, a model now revived in eco-village designs. Most strikingly, the Silk Road's collapse in the 14th century, accelerated by the Black Death, allowed many ecosystems to recover naturally, proving that even the most damaged landscapes can heal when given respite. The road's true environmental legacy isn't just a cautionary tale, it's proof that trade and sustainability have always been intertwined. When modern cargo ships follow ancient spice routes, or when renewable energy projects retrace canat paths with solar canals, they're walking a line first drawn by camel caravans. The difference now is we can see the stakes clearly, not just the price of goods, but the cost etched into the earth itself. The windswept ruins of the Silk Road have always whispered to those willing to listen, not just with the rustle of sand over forgotten cities, but with the echoes of adventurers who risked everything to decode its secrets. One such figure was the Hungarian-British archaeologist Aurel Stein, who in 1906 followed rumors of a walled-up library in the deserts of Dunhuang. What he found surpassed all legends: the Mogao Caves, a trove of 50,000 manuscripts sealed for nearly a millennium. Working by candlelight, Stein unrolled Buddhist sutras written in 17 languages, contracts between Sogdian merchants, even children's multiplication tables, each scrap a puzzle piece reassembling the route's vibrant daily life. His discoveries came at a cost. Local caretakers, unaware of the text's value, traded entire crates for trivial sums, but they ignited a global fascination with the Silk Road's buried truths. Not all explorers sought knowledge for its own sake. The Swedish geographer Sven Hedin spent decades mapping the Taklamakan's lethal dunes, driven by equal parts scientific curiosity and imperial ambition. His 1895 expedition nearly ended in disaster when his team's water evaporated in leather sacks, forcing them to drink camel blood and urine to survive. Yet Hedin's most startling find wasn't treasure, but a geographical phantom. the lost riverbed of the Darya, which ancient texts claimed watered entire kingdoms before vanishing into the sands. By proving its existence through satellite-defying surveys, Hedin revealed how environmental collapse had rewritten the Silk Road's map centuries before. Meanwhile, in the foothills of the Pamirs, Russian explorer Nikolai Prjevalsky pursued a different obsession: the Silk Road's untamed edges. His expeditions catalogued hundreds of plant and animal species unknown to Western science, from the wild Bactrian camel to the elusive snow leopard. But Prjevalsky's journals also preserved something rarer: the oral histories of Kyrgyz nomads, whose ancestors had guided caravans through mountain passes now crumbling under glaciers. These stories, passed down through generations, contained navigational wisdom no map could capture: which valleys echoed before avalanches, where to find secret springs marked by crescent-shaped rocks. The race to document the Silk Road wasn't without controversy. French explorer Paul Pelliot's 1907 acquisition of Dunhuang manuscripts sparked outrage when Chinese scholars realized their cultural heritage was being carted off to European museums. Pelliot, fluent in 13 Asian languages, defended his actions as preservation, arguing the texts would have crumbled unnoticed in damp caves, but the ethical debate still simmers today. Similarly, German archaeologist Albert von Lecoq's removal of entire mural sections from Bezeklik caves, though groundbreaking for Central Asian art studies, left behind scars visible a century later. What unites these disparate figures is their role as accidental time travelers. Stein's manuscripts revealed how 7th century Zoroastrian fire temples shared architects with Buddhist monasteries. Hedin's maps proved Roman glass reached China centuries earlier than believed. Even their failures were illuminating when Prjevalsky's team misidentified a herd of wild horses as prehistoric survivors. It exposed how deeply the Silk Road's mythologies had permeated Western imaginations. Modern technology continues their work with less destructive tools. Satellite imaging uncovers buried caravansarais invisible to the naked eye, while DNA analysis of ancient caravan garbage heaps traces the spread of crops like peaches from China to Persia. In Uzbekistan, archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar recently found a Sogdian merchant's house with its accounting records intact clay tablets tallying silk debts in 4 currencies, proving the route's economy was more sophisticated than historians imagined. The greatest discovery, however, may be how these explorations mirror the Silk Road itself. Just as medieval merchants carried goods in both directions, modern scholars shuttle between past and present, unearthing forgotten technologies while grappling with the ethics of cultural stewardship. When a team from Kyoto University reconstructed an 8th century Tang Dynasty loom using mural blueprints from Dunhuang, they didn't just revive a weaving technique, they reconnected threads in the fabric of human ingenuity. The road's allure endures not because it's vanished, but because it keeps revealing new turns, challenging each generation to venture further into the intersections of history, memory, and dust. A Persian painter dips his brush into crushed lapis lazuli, tracing the delicate curve of a camel's silhouette against a backdrop of snow-capped mountains. This miniature, no larger than a man's palm, captures more than just a scene. It holds the essence of the Silk Road's allure, where danger and beauty walked hand in hand. Across continents and centuries, artists and writers became the route's unofficial chroniclers, translating the crunch of caravan wheels on gravel into strokes of ink and verse. Their works weren't mere decorations, they were passports to distant worlds, offering those who'd never left their hometowns a taste of the exotic. Take the Tang Dynasty poets who turned camel bells into metaphors. Liebei's verses painted Samarkand's markets as realms of sensory overload, where pearls clatter like rain on jade plates and wine ferments in skins older than empires. His rival Du Fu took a darker tone, depicting the Taklamakan's dunes as the bones of greedy men bleached white by the sun's accounting. These weren't just pretty words, they were social commentary. When a poet described a Sogdian merchant's tears as he buried his partner in the go-by, Tang readers understood the human cost behind their silken robes. Even government officials got in on the act. One bored customs officer at Dunhuang left behind a doodle of a grumbling camel on a tax ledger, its cartoonish frown immortalizing the universal annoyance of paperwork. The Islamic world responded with visual splendor. Persian miniaturists developed a secret language of symbols. A falcon perched on a ruler's wrist meant fair trade, while a cracked water jug hinted at betrayal. One stunning manuscript page from Herat shows Alexander the Great, a Silk Road folk hero, wearing a Mongol-style hat as he receives Tibetan envoys, blending history and contemporary politics into a single image. These artists played with perspective like the route itself twisted geography. In a single frame, you might see a Chinese pagoda, a Byzantine dome, and a Persian garden, all coexisting impossibly yet harmoniously. Meanwhile, in the caves of Dunhuang, Buddhist muralists fused styles from half the known world. A single celestial musician might have Indian facial features, Persian-style swirling robes, and a Chinese lute, her halo painted with gold dust carried from Mediterranean mines. The pigments alone tell a trade story: vermilion from cinnabar mined in Spain, malachite green from Central Asia, and that precious lapis blue from Afghan mountains, worth its weight in silver. These weren't just religious artworks, they were cultural mashups, proving that devotion could travel as freely as spices. Even everyday objects became canvases. A Sogdian ceramic jug might feature Greek-style grapevines alongside Chinese phoenixes, while a Nestorian Christian tombstone in Xi'an bears a cross perched atop a lotus flower, a theological compromise carved in stone. The real surprise: how quickly these hybrids became ordinary. A 7th century Central Asian prince's diary casually mentions buying that new fashion of trousers with hand embroidery, as if mixing cultural signals was as natural as breathing. Literature crossed borders just as boldly. The 1001 Nights borrowed Indian and Persian folktales carried by caravans, while Japanese court ladies wrote poems about the scent of sandalwood from the western lands without ever leaving Kyoto. Some of the most poignant works came from those caught between worlds. The Uyghur poet Yusuf Kos Hajib wrote in the 11th century, "My tongue tastes of melons from Kashgar, my dreams smell of the Caspian, and my heart keeps time with camel bells no one else can hear." His masterpiece, Wisdom of Royal Glory, became a Silk Road manifesto, arguing that a ruler's wealth lay not in his vaults, but in his ability to understand strangers. The road's dangers inspired equally vivid creations. Armenian bards composed epic ballads about merchants outwitting demons in the Pamirs, while Chinese ghost stories warned of shui-gui water spirits said to drown careless travelers at river crossings. These tales served practical purposes. A story about a greedy trader eaten by wolves after taking a shortcut was really a lesson about sticking to established routes. Even maps became artworks. The famous Daming Hun Yi-2 world map, drawn on silk, placed Jerusalem and Mecca just a hand's width from Beijing, collapsing distance into something manageable and beautiful. What unites these works across time and medium is their hunger for connection. A Persian poet describing a Tang princess's eyebrows as willow leaves dipped in midnight wasn't just flattering, he was bridging aesthetic traditions. When a Byzantine mosaicist in Ravenna used Chinese blue to depict the Nile, or when a Tibetan Thangka painter included a distinctly Roman-looking angel, they were proving that art could do what politics often couldn't: make the foreign familiar. The Silk Road's greatest masterpiece wasn't any single painting or poem, but the way it taught humanity to see itself in the other, one brushstroke, one stanza at a time. The Silk Road's dusty trails and bustling caravansarais might seem worlds apart from today's container ships and digital marketplaces, but its lessons pulse through the veins of modern globalization. Consider how ancient Sogdian merchants built trust across continents without emails or contracts, relying instead on reputation, networks where a broken promise in Samarkand could ruin a family's credit in Chang'an. Today's blockchain technology and credit rating systems echo this same principle. Trust is the currency that makes trade flow, whether carved into clay tablets or encrypted in digital ledgers. The difference: those medieval traders understood something we often forget. That trust isn't just about transactions, but about the human relationships behind them. When a Silk Road merchant honored a deal after a bandit attack wiped out his profits, he wasn't just preserving his own standing, he was upholding an entire ecosystem of interdependence. Modern diplomacy could learn from the route's subtle arts of cultural brokerage. Take the Uyghur translators who mediated between Tang China and the Abbasid Caliphate, skillfully softening demands and finding compromises where direct confrontation would have sparked conflict. Their approach mirrors today's backchannel negotiations and cultural attachés, but with one crucial distinction: they operated without the baggage of rigid national identities. A Nestorian Christian serving as a Mongol envoy to Europe didn't see himself as representing Asia. He was bridging specific interests with practical solutions. In an era of geopolitical polarization, this fluidity offers a template for problem-solving that transcends us versus them mentalities. The Silk Road's greatest gift was its ability to turn diversity into innovation. The bazaars of Merv and Kashgar thrived because they welcomed Persian mathematicians, Tibetan herbalists, and Byzantine glassmakers to share knowledge freely. Compare this to today's tech hubs like Silicon Valley or Shenzhen. Their strength lies not in isolation, but in attracting global talent to collide and collaborate. Yet ancient traders grasped a nuance we sometimes miss. True exchange isn't about extracting ideas, but allowing them to evolve. When papermaking spread from China to Baghdad, it didn't just replicate, it adapted, incorporating local materials and inspiring new uses like miniature painting and currency. Modern intellectual property laws could take note. Progress thrives when ideas circulate, mutate, and improve through countless hands. Environmental sustainability is another arena where the past speaks urgently to the present. The abandoned Khanate systems and deforested caravansarai routes stand as stark warnings about overexploitation, but they also showcase ingenious adaptations like the Sogdian water-sharing treaties that allocated irrigation rights based on caravan traffic, or the Mongol-era reforestation edicts along vital mountain passes. These weren't environmental policies as we know them. They were survival strategies baked into economic planning. As climate change disrupts modern supply chains, the Silk Road whispers a blunt truth: trade routes that poison their own foundations are doomed to become desert relics. Perhaps the most poignant legacy is the route's demonstration of soft power's limits. For all their military might, empires like Tang China and Abbasid Persia couldn't control the Silk Road. They could only facilitate it, compete along it, and occasionally be reshaped by it. Today's infrastructure megaprojects and trade wars follow similar patterns. No single nation, no matter how powerful, can fully dictate the terms of global exchange. The Mongol Empire's collapse proved that even the most ruthless monopolists couldn't stop merchants from finding new paths, just as modern tariffs often divert trade flows rather than stop them. What endures isn't any particular route or commodity, but the irreducible human drive to connect. A 14th century Venetian glass bead found in an Inuit settlement speaks the same language as a Silicon Valley app downloaded in rural Kenya. Both testify that curiosity and need will always find ways to bridge distance. The Silk Road's true lesson isn't about reviving old pathways, but recognizing that every generation must weave its own web of connections, guided by ancient wisdom but tailored to new realities. In the end, the caravan never really stops. It just changes its shape, carrying forward the eternal dialogue between isolation and exchange that defines our species. The Silk Road never truly ended, it simply evolved, its spirit woven into the fabric of our modern world like strands of gold through ancient tapestry. What began as a whisper of camel bells between oasis towns became the blueprint for globalization itself, proving that connection is the true currency of civilization. Think about it, every time you sip coffee brewed from Ethiopian beans roasted in Italy, or scroll through news on a phone assembled in China with software coded in California, you're walking the same path those Sogdian merchants did, participating in a network where borders blur and cultures collide. The road's greatest legacy isn't measured in bolts of silk or chests of spice, but in the irreversible shifts it sparked in human consciousness. Before those caravans started rolling, most societies saw outsiders as threats or curiosities. But when a Persian astronomer could debate celestial mechanics with a Chinese scholar in Samarkand's courtyards, or when a Byzantine nobleman's health depended on prescriptions from an Indian physician, difference stopped being dangerous and started being indispensable. That mental revolution, the understanding that strangers might hold pieces of your future, still defines us today. Silicon Valley thrives because it embraces immigrant engineers, just as Tang Dynasty Chang'an flourished by welcoming Persian artists. The same open-mindedness that made Merv's bazaars hum now powers the world's most innovative cities, yet the Silk Road also whispers warnings across the centuries. Its collapse reminds us that no system is too big to fail. Not the Mongol Empire's postal network, not Rome's insatiable appetite for Eastern luxuries, not even the Ottoman stranglehold on trade routes that once seemed unshakable. When societies prioritize short-term profit over long-term resilience, when they exploit connections without nurturing them, the results are written in abandoned caravansarais and cities swallowed by sand. Our modern supply chains, for all their digital precision, remain vulnerable to the same frailties: pandemics, protectionism, and the peril of assuming tomorrow will mirror today. What endures is the road's radical lesson. Power doesn't belong to those who hoard wealth, but to those who enable exchange. The Mongols conquered an empire, but it was their protection of merchants that made it prosper. Venice built its golden age not on military might, but on being the marketplace where East met West. Today's parallel isn't in superpowers or corporations, but in the invisible architectures of trust, the banking protocols, shipping lanes, and digital platforms that, like caravansarais of old, grease the wheels of global interaction. As you swipe through delivery apps or video call colleagues across oceans, remember, you're inheriting a story that began with desert winds and determined travelers. The Silk Road teaches us that progress isn't about inventing the wheel, but about sharing its revolutions. So the next time you marvel at some cross-cultural fusion, whether it's Korean tacos or AI trained on global data, tip your hat to those ancient wayfarers. They proved that the most enduring empires aren't built on conquest, but on curiosity. Now we turn to you. What forgotten crossroads of history should we explore next? A lost city swallowed by jungle, the unsung inventors who shaped our world. Drop your suggestions below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the past that shaped our present. After all, history isn't just about where we've been, it's a compass for where